Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe this channel. So, let's go. It was supposed to be a simple hike. A few friends, some packed lunches, and a quiet day in the woods. The forest was the perfect escape. Nothing but the rustling of leaves and the sound of birds calling from the canopy. We'd been walking for a few hours when we found a secluded clearing just off the trail, the kind you only stumble upon when you get lost. We dropped our bags and sat on the soft moss, eating and laughing like we always did. The sun filtered through the trees in golden beams, and the scent of pine and earth filled the air. Everything felt peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't as alone as we should have been. Did you guys hear that? I asked, suddenly feeling uneasy. Relax, Mark said, waving a hand. It's just the wind. But I wasn't so sure. There was something about the quiet that had changed. The forest, once so alive with the sounds of birds and squirrels, now felt almost dead. The breeze had stopped, and the air hung heavy, thick with something I couldn't identify. I tried to ignore it and continued eating, but my eyes kept darting toward the trees, scanning for any movement. Every now and then, I could swear I saw something between the trunks, shapes shifting just out of sight. Guys, seriously, something's off, I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy, my pulse quickening. Mark chuckled. You're being paranoid. It's just a forest. But I wasn't sure anymore. The sense of being watched was overwhelming now. I turned to look behind us, at the trail we'd come down, but all I could see was more trees. There was no sign of anyone else, no other hikers, nothing. That's when I saw it. A flicker of white, just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the shadows of the trees. Do you see that? I whispered. What are you talking about? Laura asked, standing beside me. There, I said, pointing toward the trees. There's someone, I think. We all turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze that had returned. Are you messing with us? Mark asked, giving me a shove. No, I said, my voice trembling. I swear there was someone there. But the more I stared, the less I was sure of what I had seen. It was just the trees, the shadows. Nothing more. I'm getting a weird vibe, Laura said, her voice tight. Maybe we should head back. I agreed. The sooner we left, the better. We packed up quickly, my hands shaking as I tried to zip my bag. Every rustle of the leaves felt like someone was right behind me. Every snap of a twig made my heart race. I glanced around again, but there was no figure, no person watching from the edge of the clearing. It was just my imagination. We walked back down the trail, trying to shake off the tension, but the forest felt different now. The trees seemed closer, as though they were leaning in toward us, blocking out the light. And then it happened again. A movement, just out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but once again there was nothing, except a sound, a low, almost imperceptible rustle, like footsteps in the leaves. I stopped in my tracks. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark frowned. Stop messing around. But then Laura froze beside me, her face pale. I heard it too. There it was again, a shuffle of movement in the underbrush, far too deliberate to be an animal. We all turned, looking down the trail behind us. The path was empty. No one else was there. My breath quickened. We need to move, now. We started walking faster, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It only grew stronger. The air felt colder now, the shadows deeper. The forest, which had once felt so open, now felt like a maze, the trees pressing in on us from all sides. I dared another glance behind me. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the sensation. It was like something was following us, keeping just enough distance to stay hidden. The trail curved ahead, and I heard another rustling sound. This time, I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know what was there. "Just keep moving," I muttered, urging the others to pick up the pace. As we reached the edge of the forest, the feeling of dread finally began to ease. The trees gave way to an open field, and the distant hum of traffic reminded me that we were almost back to civilization. We didn't speak much as we walked to the parking lot, but the tension lingered in the air. Mark finally broke the silence. "You guys seriously think someone was out there with us?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy. But then I remembered the shadow I'd seen, the flicker of white in the trees. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head, "but I know what I felt." We all piled into the car and drove off in silence. I didn't look back at the woods, but even now as I write this, I'm not so sure the forest was empty that day. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe not. But I still can't shake the feeling that someone, was watching us. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows between the towering trees. It was peaceful, almost serene. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath our feet and the distant call of birds. We'd been walking for an hour or so, our conversation drifting between jokes and memories, the way it usually does when you're with friends in the quiet of the woods. "Hey, let's take a different trail," Jake suggested. "This path looks like it goes deeper into the woods. Could be interesting." Emma and Laura agreed, so we veered off the main path, following a narrow, overgrown trail that wound through the thick underbrush. The air was cooler here, the canopy of trees blocking the last rays of sunlight. My footsteps slowed, and I found myself glancing around more often than I should have. There was something about this part of the forest that felt different. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like twisted hands. I tried to shake off the feeling, but the quiet seemed to grow heavier the deeper we went. After another 15 minutes, Jake stopped suddenly. "Do you guys hear that?" We all went silent, listening carefully. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a rustling, but not from the wind. It sounded like something, or someone, moving through the brush. Probably just an animal, Emma said, though her voice lacked confidence. She stepped forward and the rest of us followed, though with a sense of unease starting to creep in. But the rustling didn't stop. It grew louder, more deliberate. I glanced around, the sense that we were being watched sinking into my bones. The trees were too thick to see through, but I could almost feel something in the shadows, lurking just out of sight. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking a little more than I intended. There was no reply, just the constant rustling. "Stop. Freaking out," Jake said with a nervous laugh, but his eyes kept darting around too. He was just as uneasy as the rest of us. We walked a few more steps, and then I heard it. A faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Go back." My heart thudded in my chest. I froze. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, my voice tight with fear. Emma's face had gone pale. "I heard it too," she said, almost too quietly. "It was right there." We all turned toward the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Just the trees, the thick undergrowth, and the fading light. "Maybe we should head back," Laura said, her voice shaking slightly. I agreed immediately, stepping back cautiously toward the trail we had come from. That's when I noticed it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching us. It was tall, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could make out the outline of a person. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking. The figure didn't answer. It didn't move. I took a step forward, my breath catching in my throat. But as I did, the figure slowly began to fade into the darkness of the forest. It wasn't like it had turned and walked away. It just disappeared. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. "Okay, that's enough," Jake said, backing away. "We need to go. Now." We turned quickly, retracing our steps, the sound of the rustling following us growing louder again. It was almost like it was keeping pace with us, just out of sight, just behind the trees. The whispering came again, louder this time. "Go back. Go back." I glanced over my shoulder, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the same figure again, lurking just beyond the edge of the trail. But this time, it wasn't standing still. It was following us, but always staying just out of reach. I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on me. The trees seemed to close in, the air thickening with each step. I could barely make out the path ahead, but I kept moving, pushing forward, urging the others to hurry. Finally, we broke through the tree line and into the clearing where our cabin stood, the faint light of the porch illuminating the edge of the forest. We didn't stop to look back. We just kept walking until we were safely inside, the door locked behind us. The rustling, the whispers, everything stopped the moment we were in the cabin. The forest outside seemed to settle back into its natural state, the eerie feeling evaporating, as the night resumed its calm. We didn't speak much after that. The tension between us was thick, the silence unnerving. We all knew what we had heard, what we had felt, and none of us dared to step outside for the rest of the night. When morning came, the forest was once again just a forest, a place of beauty and peace. But I knew what we had encountered was real. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I stepped into the forest with my backpack slung over one shoulder. It was supposed to be a short walk, just to clear my mind. The evening air was cool, and the forest was still, save for the soft rustling of leaves underfoot. I had always loved the woods, how quiet and peaceful they were. It's easy to forget the world when you're surrounded by trees that stretch so high you can't see the sky. The deeper I walked, the more the noises of civilization faded, until it was just me and the sounds of nature. At first, it was just the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a bird. But soon, I started hearing something else, a whisper. It was faint at first, like the wind moving through the branches, but as I ventured deeper, it became clearer. The whisper wasn't the wind at all. It was as if someone was speaking just out of reach, too quiet to understand. I paused. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end and a cold shiver ran through me. I looked around, but the woods were empty, just trees and shadows. Still, the whispering continued. It was a strange sensation, like the forest was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't quite catch the words. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. The isolation, the silence. It could mess with anyone. I decided to keep walking, telling myself it was nothing, but the whispers followed. "Did you hear that?" I muttered under my breath, my voice suddenly sounding too loud in the quiet. I stopped and strained to listen. There was no wind tonight, not even the usual rustling of leaves, just that low, constant whisper. It seemed to be coming from all around me now, like the trees themselves were speaking. I began to feel like I wasn't alone. It was as if eyes were watching me from the darkness, and every rustle of the leaves made me jump. The whispering was growing louder now, clearer but still unintelligible. Suddenly, there was a soft thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. I whipped around, my heart hammering. But there was nothing there. The whispering stopped. I stood perfectly still, listening to the silence that followed, but the silence felt wrong. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I started walking again, faster this time, feeling the tension coil in my chest. The deeper I went, the darker it became, even though the night had just begun to fall. The trees felt closer now, their branches like fingers reaching down, and the whispers returned, more urgent this time, closer. I broke into a run. My footsteps were loud, echoing through the woods as I tried to make my way back to the path. The trees seemed to close in on me, their twisted branches blocking the way. I stumbled over roots, my breath coming faster and faster, the whispering growing louder and louder in my ears as if it was right behind me, just out of sight. I couldn't stop running. Then, suddenly, a voice. It was soft, like a breath against my ear, but it was unmistakable. "Turn back." I froze. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My body was frozen, as if the forest itself had rooted me to the spot. There was a shadow in front of me, a dark figure, barely visible, standing just between the trees. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. I couldn't see a face, just a tall, dark silhouette watching me. I took a step back, but my legs were shaking. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The whispers swirled around me, faster now, like an angry crowd closing in. "Turn back," the voice repeated, clearer this time, but the figure didn't move. I took another step back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I turned around. I had to leave. The whispering followed me, getting fainter as I ran, but it never quite stopped. It was as if the forest was trying to keep me, to pull me back into its depths. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, my chest was tight and my breath was shallow. The town was just ahead, the lights from nearby houses cutting through the darkness. I didn't stop until I was safely inside the streetlights, surrounded by people, and the whispers finally faded away. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. For just a second, in the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw something, someone, watching me from between the trees. I'd always been drawn to the forest. There was something peaceful about it, its towering trees, the soft rustling of leaves, the air heavy with earth and pine. I'd gone on countless hikes through the woods near my house, but today, something felt different. It started as a simple camping trip. I'd invited a few friends, eager for a weekend away from the city. The plan was simple: hike, set up camp, tell stories around the fire, and fall asleep under a blanket of stars. Everything went smoothly at first. We spent the afternoon hiking along familiar trails, laughing and joking, the sun warming our faces. By the time we reached the clearing where we'd set up camp, it was just starting to get dark. We gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and talking about everything and nothing. The usual sounds of the forest surrounded us: the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackling of the fire. I leaned back against a tree, feeling the heat of the flames on my skin. But as the night deepened, I started to notice something unsettling. The woods around us seemed quieter. The chirping stopped, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I tried to shake off the unease, but the silence pressed in around me. "Anyone else notice how quiet it's gotten?" I asked, my voice breaking the stillness. Jake, sitting beside me, chuckled. "You're just tired. You know how it is out here. Everything sounds quiet when the sun goes down." I nodded, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But something wasn't right. There was a weight to the silence, a strange heaviness that made my skin crawl. I stood up, hoping to shake off the discomfort by stretching my legs. As I walked, away from the firelight and into the shadows, I glanced around. The trees loomed over me, their dark branches swaying in the windless air. But then I heard it, a whisper. I froze. It was faint at first, like the wind brushing past my ear, but it didn't feel like the wind. It felt intentional. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, turning back to the group, but they were too busy chatting to notice. I shook my head and kept walking, trying to dismiss the feeling gnawing at the edges of my mind. But the whispering continued. It grew louder this time, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't words, not exactly, but there was a rhythm to it, like a chant. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching. The forest was suddenly still. No crickets, no rustling of leaves, just that whisper, unmistakable, and it was all around me. I took a deep breath and turned back to the camp. My heart was pounding now. I didn't know what I was afraid of, but I was terrified. "Jake," I called, my voice shaking. "Do you hear that?" He looked up from the fire, brow furrowed. "Hear what?" "The whispering," I said more urgently. He gave me a confused look but stood up. "You sure you're okay?" Before I could answer, the whispering stopped, suddenly, and just like that, everything felt wrong. The air felt colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. "Let's go back to the fire," I suggested, my voice unnervingly tight. Jake agreed, and we both walked quickly back to the others. But even as we sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone. The fire seemed smaller now, dimmer, though it was still burning brightly. I glanced over at the trees, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something. A figure standing between them just outside the reach of the firelight. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jake followed my gaze, but there was nothing. Just the trees swaying gently in the night. "It's just the shadows playing tricks on you," he said, though I could tell he wasn't entirely sure. We tried to go back to our conversation, but my eyes kept flickering toward the forest. The feeling of being watched never left. I felt it deep in my bones. Every rustle of the leaves felt like someone moving just out of sight. At some point, the others went to bed, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The fire was dying down, and the forest seemed even darker now, the trees pressing in around me. I stood up to add another log to the fire, my hands trembling slightly as I reached into the pile. And then, the whispering returned. It was louder this time, clear as day, but it wasn't in the wind. It was coming from the trees, from all around me, the words just out of reach. I spun around, my breath coming faster. I knew no one else was awake, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving toward me from the darkness. I quickly grabbed another log, throwing it on the fire. The flames roared to life, casting shadows across the trees. The whispering faded, but the fear remained. I didn't sleep much that night. The shadows felt alive. The wind seemed to carry whispers, and the trees. They felt like they were closing in. But by morning, the forest was just a forest again. The sun pierced through the trees. The sounds of the birds returned, and the magic of the night seemed to fade. We packed up quickly, no one mentioning the strange events of the night. We didn't need to. We all felt it. Something was in those woods, watching us, but we left. And for the first time, I was grateful for the sound of a car engine and the hum of the highway, far from the trees. We weren't supposed to stay that long. Just a quick weekend retreat in the woods, a chance to unwind, get away from phones and work and the weight of city life. There were 5 of us: me, Aaron, Liz, Cam, and Nora. We had been best friends since high school and somehow had managed to stay close into adulthood. We chose a remote patch of forest up north, the kind of place with no cell signal and only one narrow road in. It was late September, and the pines had started shedding needles, creating a soft golden carpet beneath our boots. The air was cool, crisp. It was supposed to be perfect, and for the most part, it was. We arrived Friday afternoon, parked at the trailhead, and hiked about an hour into the forest before setting up camp. We found a flat clearing near a small stream, with plenty of space for our tents and a central spot for the fire. The trees stood tall around us, ancient and quiet, the way old woods often are. The first night, we stayed up late telling stories and roasting marshmallows. There was laughter, teasing, inside jokes. The woods felt safe, almost sacred. But everything changed the second night. It started with the light. We had just finished dinner, the fire was burning low, and we were settling into that easy silence that comes from being outdoors too long. Tired, full, content. That's when Aaron said, "Hey, is someone else out here?" We all turned. Through the trees, about 50 yards from our camp, there was a lantern. A dim, flickering glow, swaying gently as if someone were walking with it. We stared in silence. "Could be a ranger," Nora offered. At this hour, I checked my watch. It was almost midnight. "Maybe another group," Liz said. But we all knew how unlikely that was. We hadn't passed anyone on the trail. There were no cars at the trailhead besides ours. And this section of forest wasn't exactly popular. The lantern continued moving slowly, parallel to our campsite, just visible through the trees. Aaron stood. "I'm going to say hi. Maybe they need help." "No," I said quickly. "Don't. Just wait." There was something about the way the light moved. It didn't bounce like someone walking. It drifted. Nora whispered, "Does anyone else feel weird?" Yes. The air felt heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Cam stood too, uneasy. "Maybe we should douse the fire, just in case." We didn't argue. We smothered the flames with dirt and crouched in the darkness, watching. The lantern had stopped. It was now perfectly still between the trees. Then it flickered, once, twice, and vanished. We didn't sleep much that night. By morning, we convinced ourselves it had been nothing. A trick of the light, maybe someone night hiking. Nothing sinister. But we all avoided mentioning how cold the air had gotten when the light disappeared, or how we'd all heard the faint crack of branches nearby long after it vanished. The next night, we kept the fire large. Too large, probably. We wanted the light. Around midnight, the forest went silent again. I don't mean quiet, I mean dead silent. No crickets, no wind. Just the sound of our own breathing. Liz whispered, "It's happening again." And it was. The lantern was back, this time closer, maybe 30 yards out. Still swaying gently, still just bright enough to see but never clear. No one moved. Then Cam hissed, "Look, there's something behind it." We leaned forward, squinting. Behind the glow, barely distinguishable from the trees, was a figure. Not walking, standing, watching, too far to see details. Just the shape of a person. "Okay," Aaron said softly. "We need to leave." "Where?" Nora asked. "It's between us and the trail." That was true. The figure stood in the exact direction of the path back to the car. "I don't like this," Liz whispered. "This feels wrong." The lantern drifted slightly to the side. The figure didn't move. Then the light flickered and moved again, circling slowly around our camp. It was like it was searching. We didn't breathe. We barely moved. After what felt like an hour, but was probably minutes, the lantern and the figure both faded back into the trees. Still, we didn't sleep. By dawn, the woods were alive again. Birds singing, branches swaying. We packed up fast. None of us ate. We just wanted to get out. But the trail back felt longer than we remembered. Every step felt like something was behind us. We didn't speak. We just walked. At one point, I turned to look back, and I swear I saw the flicker of light between the trees. We made it to the car without incident. We got in, locked the doors, and drove. Not until we were 20 miles away did anyone speak. "What was that?" Nora asked finally. None of us had an answer. We don't talk about it much now, and we never went back. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think about that light, that slow, swaying glow, and I wonder what would have happened if we'd followed it, or worse, if it had come closer. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, just a group of friends heading out into the woods to escape the noise of the city. We'd spent the afternoon hiking through the dense forest, talking, laughing, and enjoying the natural beauty around us. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the treetops, and everything felt perfect. But I should have known. There's always something about the woods that feels off, and I should have paid attention to that feeling. By the time we found the clearing where we'd set up camp, it was already dark. The forest looked different now. Dark shadows seemed to move among the trees. The air was thick and still, like it was holding its breath. We set up the tent, unpacked our gear, and soon a fire crackled in the center of the clearing. It was warm, comforting. For a while, we sat around it, passing around marshmallows, telling stories, and making the most of our time away from everything. The silence of the forest at night was something I'd gotten used to over the years, but tonight it felt heavier, almost suffocating. The only sounds were the occasional crackling of the fire and the wind rustling through the branches. But then it stopped. All of it. The wind, the crickets, the owls. It was as if the forest itself had paused. I glanced over at my friends. Jason was poking at the fire with a stick. Sarah and Emma were talking in low voices, and Mark had his head tipped back, staring up at the stars. I didn't want to ruin the mood, but the stillness felt unnerving. Anyone else feel like the air's gotten heavy? I asked, trying to sound casual. Jason looked up, frowning. What do you mean? I don't know. It just feels weird, like the forest holding its breath or something. Emma laughed. You're imagining things, man. It's just the quiet. It's peaceful. But I wasn't imagining it. The quiet had become oppressive. Even the crackle of the fire seemed muted, like it was happening in another world, far away. My gaze drifted to the trees surrounding the camp. They stood tall, their twisted trunks like sentinels, the shadows they cast deeper than they should have been. It was as though they were watching us. I shook my head, trying to push the feeling aside. I was just tired. The day had been long. I'd get some sleep, and everything would feel normal again. After a while, we decided to call it a night. We settled into the tent, the soft rustling of sleeping bags the only sound. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that strange sensation again, the feeling that we were being watched. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it. A whisper. It was soft at first, barely audible, like the wind had picked up, but it wasn't the wind. I could feel it, clear as day. Words. Faint, indistinct, but there. Someone, something, was speaking, and it wasn't in any language I recognized. I sat up abruptly, my heart racing. I held my breath, straining to hear. The whispering seemed to be coming from outside the tent, just beyond the thin fabric. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Did you hear that? I whispered to Jason, who was lying beside me. He shifted, groaning. Hear what? There's someone out there, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Didn't you hear it? A whisper? Jason sat up, his eyes wide. No, there's nothing. Probably just the wind. But it wasn't the wind. I knew it. I'd grown up camping in the woods, and I'd never heard anything like this before. I glanced over at the others, but they were still asleep, oblivious to what I was hearing. The whispering came again. This time, I could make out a few words. Leave. Leave now. I froze. It was faint, like it was being carried by the wind. But there was no wind. The air outside the tent was still as a tomb. My mind raced. Who would be out there speaking in the middle of the night? I didn't want to be the one to alarm the group, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness. I unzipped the tent carefully, trying not to wake anyone, and stepped outside. The moment I did, the whispering stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening. The forest was as still as death. The fire was nothing more than glowing embers now, casting weak shadows on the ground. The trees were motionless, their branches no longer swaying. Then I saw it. A shadow. At first, I thought it was just the play of the firelight on the trees, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was something, or someone, moving between the trunks of the trees. It was tall, slender, and for a brief moment I saw a faint silhouette against the backdrop of the night. A figure, just barely visible. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring back at me. The whispering had started again, barely audible, coming from all around me. I called out to my friends in the tent, "Guys, wake up!" But no one stirred. It was as if they couldn't hear me at all. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It stayed there, unmoving, silent, just beyond the trees. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the shadows. I stumbled back toward the tent, my heart pounding. The whispering faded, but the oppressive silence returned, thicker than ever. I zipped the tent closed and lay back down, trying to calm my breathing. In the morning, I didn't mention what had happened. The others were eager to pack up and leave, but they didn't know why. The woods felt wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them. What would I say? That I had heard voices? That I had seen a figure standing in the trees? The truth was, I was scared. I didn't want to know what that figure was or what it wanted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the forest that was watching us. It was something else. Something ancient, lurking just beyond the trees. We left the woods early that morning, driving away in silence. I didn't look back, but every so often, when the wind is still and the world is too quiet, I hear it, the faint whispering, just at the edge of my hearing, and I wonder if it's still out there. I'd always been drawn to the forest. There's something about it that felt timeless, as if the trees had stories to tell if you only listened closely enough. That's why I suggested the camping trip in the first place. A weekend getaway with a few friends, nothing fancy, just a chance to reconnect with nature and escape the chaos of everyday life. But as the days wore on, I realized this forest wasn't quite the peaceful sanctuary I'd imagined. It started out like any other trip. We drove up to the forest in the late afternoon, the sun still high in the sky, casting long shadows across the winding road. The air was fresh and crisp, the kind of coolness that only comes after a long stretch of summer heat. We arrived at the trailhead around dusk, a good time to set up camp. "Perfect timing," I said, glancing around at the dense woods surrounding us. "We'll have the place to ourselves. I think we're about to get the best sunset view." My friends, Jake, Emily, and Sarah, were all eager to stretch their legs after the drive. We each grabbed a bag, some gear, and headed off down the path. The forest was quiet, the only sound being our footsteps crunching on the dry leaves beneath us. The trees here were tall, their branches intertwining like fingers, casting dark shadows that shifted in the light breeze. Emily, ever the optimist, kept up a steady stream of chatter as we walked, while Jake and I exchanged knowing looks. Neither of us were as enthusiastic about nature walks, but we didn't want to rain on Emily's parade. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, fading into the deep blue of evening. We set up camp in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As the fire crackled to life, we pulled out our camping chairs and circled around it, the flames dancing in the cool night air. The fire was comforting, but something about the forest felt off. It wasn't an immediate realization. It was a creeping sense of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the warmth of the fire and the laughter of my friends as they teased each other about ghost stories. But then the air seemed to grow heavier, like something was pressing down on us, making everything feel just a little too quiet. Emily noticed first. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice sharp with unease. At first, I thought, she was just imagining things. But then I heard it too, a whisper. It was faint, barely audible over the crackling of the fire. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't like any wind I had ever heard. This was something different, almost like a voice, hushed and low, barely carrying through the trees. "Is someone else out here?" Jake asked, looking around the clearing, his brow furrowed. I stood up, squinting into the dark. The whispering was growing louder now, an unintelligible hum that seemed to echo through the woods. I couldn't make out the words, but the cadence of it felt wrong, somehow. "I'll check it out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Wait, no. You don't think it could be a bear or something?" I shook, my head trying to dismiss the idea. "No, it's too quiet for that. It sounds like a voice." I took a few cautious steps toward the edge of the clearing, away from the firelight. The woods around us were dense, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches tangled and dark. The whispering was now a steady murmur, like a chant, just on the edge of a comprehension. It felt like it was coming from all directions, yet no one was in sight. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw something, a shape moving between the trees. It was too tall to be an animal, and the way it swayed unnervingly in the mist made my heart race. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't want to alarm the others just yet. I stepped forward cautiously, but the figure disappeared into the shadows before I could get a better look. "Guys," I called out, my voice shaky, "there's something out there." The whispering stopped instantly, and the forest went utterly still. My ears rang with silence. The oppressive quiet felt like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the fire, but no one else had seen the figure. "What do you mean, something?" Emily asked, her voice tight. "I don't know. Maybe it was just a shadow or my eyes playing tricks on me," I said, but even I didn't believe it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't alone. We sat, back down, trying to shake off the unease, but the tension in the air had thickened. The whispering had started again, louder this time and from all around us. It was a low, rasping murmur that seemed to come from the very trees themselves. I could feel it in my bones. They were alive, listening, watching. I looked around frantically. "Do you hear it? The voices?" Emily, her face pale, nodded. "Yeah, but they're not words. It's just a sound." I swallowed hard. "We need to leave. Now." Jake stood up quickly. "What the hell is going on here? Is this some kind of prank?" "No," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I don't know what it is, but we're not staying here another minute." We packed up in a hurry, fumbling with gear and trying to stay calm. The whispers faded as we moved, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Every rustle of the trees, every crack of a twig underfoot made me jump. We walked fast, the woods suddenly feeling like a maze, the trees closing in behind us. The walk back was tense, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, and I could swear I saw something move just beyond the reach of my flashlight. But when I looked again, it was gone. We made it back to the car in a blur, and as we drove away, the woods faded into the distance, leaving only the darkness behind. No one spoke for a long time, each of us lost in our thoughts, the chill of the night creeping into our bones. The forest was behind us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out. I'd always been drawn to the forest. There was something peaceful about it. The towering trees, the soft rustling of leaves, the fresh, earthy scent that seemed to cleanse your soul. I'd spent countless afternoons walking through the woods, near my house, but today was different. It started as a simple camping trip. I had invited a few friends, eager for a weekend away from the chaos of city life. The plan was simple: hike, set up camp, tell stories around the fire, and fall asleep under a blanket of stars. Everything went according to plan at first. We spent the afternoon hiking along the familiar trails, laughing, joking, and taking in the crisp mountain air. By the time we reached our campsite, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. We set up our tents, started a fire, and began preparing dinner. The flickering light from the flames danced across our faces, adding warmth to the cool evening air. The sounds of the forest filled the silence. The chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle of a small animal in the underbrush, and the distant call of an owl. But as night deepened, a strange shift began to settle over the camp. The usual sounds of the forest, so familiar, so comforting, seemed to fade into a heavy silence. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the stillness pressed down on me. It was as though the world around us had suddenly stopped, breathing. I sat by the fire trying to focus on the crackling wood, the warmth of the flames, and the comforting voices of my friends, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My eyes flickered to the edge of the camp where the darkness of the trees stood like silent sentinels. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" I asked, my voice a little too loud, in the stillness. Jake, sitting beside me, looked up from the marshmallow he was roasting. "It's just the woods at night. Happens all the time. Don't think too much about it." I nodded, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Still, my gaze kept drifting back to the darkness at the edge of the camp. The trees loomed taller now, their branches swaying ever so slightly as if beckoning me. Just as I was about to say something else, I heard it. A faint sound, like the rustle of a leaf brushing against a tree. But it wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're freaking yourself out, man." "No, I swear. I heard something." I stood up, stepping away from the fire to listen more carefully. The world around me was swallowed by the darkness, the only light coming from the embers of our campfire. The trees felt closer, their presence heavier. I thought I saw a shadow move between them, but when I blinked, it was gone. I turned back toward the group, but they were still talking, unaware of my unease. The feeling, however, continued to linger, gnawing at me like a slow-growing unease. As the night stretched on, the quiet became unbearable. The wind had stopped altogether, and even the usual nocturnal creatures had fallen silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire, and every now and then, I thought I could hear the faintest whispering like voices murmuring in the distance. But every time I turned, there was nothing. "I think I'm going to take a walk," I said, standing up. "I'll be back in a bit." Jake and the others didn't seem to mind. They were too caught up in their conversation, laughing, oblivious to the tension that was creeping up on me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the camp. The woods were darker than I expected. The trees seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing deeper as I moved farther from the firelight. With every step, the air grew heavier as if the forest itself was watching me. That's when I heard it again, the whispering. It was faint at first, barely more than a rustle, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't the wind, it was voices, soft and hushed, coming from somewhere deeper, in the woods. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. The sound seemed to come from every direction, like the trees themselves were talking to each other, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the whispering, growing louder, more insistent. I turned back toward the camp, but the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. The path I had followed felt unfamiliar now, as though the trees had shifted and rearranged themselves while I wasn't looking. I began to walk faster, but the whispering followed me. It seemed to echo through the woods, bouncing off the trees, in an unsettling rhythm. It wasn't just voices anymore, it was something more. I quickened my pace, now nearly running, but the whispering grew louder and closer, filling my ears. I felt like I was being surrounded, stalked by something just beyond the edge of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness. I stumbled over a root, falling to my knees, but when I looked up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Between the trees, just at the edge of the light from my flashlight, I saw a figure. A woman, draped in a long, flowing white dress, standing completely still. Her hair was dark and tangled, her face hidden in shadow. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whispering had stopped, but the air around me was thick with an unbearable pressure. And then she moved. The woman took one step toward me, and then another. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I had to get back to camp. I jumped to my feet, sprinting through the trees, not daring to look back. The whispering resumed, growing louder, as if the entire forest was closing in on me. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. Finally, after what felt like hours, I broke through the trees and back into the clearing where the campfire was still burning. The others looked up at me, confused but unaware of the terror I had just experienced. "What's up?" Jake asked, his voice casual. I didn't answer. I sat down quickly, breathing heavily. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The woods were too silent, too still, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. We didn't speak much after that. The forest felt different somehow, alive with a presence we couldn't see. In the morning, I didn't say much as we packed up and left. I didn't want to scare anyone, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't alone out there. The forest was hiding something, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out. "What?"